Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's webcast, this month's webcast, today's webcast, whatever you want to call it. It's the best webcast this size of the Milky Way. And I don't know what else to say. It just sounded good to me.
I just want to know if Alpha Centauri is on this half or that half, just so I know where I'm sitting.
Yeah, whether you rank above or below Alpha Centauri. So, Eric, to me, you rank above.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah. I will point out, though, that we look up to the stars, but I'm just
that's fine,
however you want to take it. So I welcome everybody. Today is Eric Kuehn's webcast on the directory revolution.
That's right. Yeah, we tried to come up with a good way of putting it.
I'm a little concerned that you're not wearing a Civil War Union soldier outfit.
Yeah.
Or a colonialist outfit from
that would have been great.
It would have been, wouldn't it?
If I could have gotten like an AI thing to just throw that
a little changing, dynamic background, but instead dynamic clothing.
There you go.
So Eric is going to talk about the changes Microsoft is making on how your network and directory will work. And I will tell you, and I say this when Eric's not around, so I'm going to say it when he is around. If Microsoft has questions about AD, they call Eric. He is, and all joking aside, I have known a lot of people that deal with AD and run AD on a daily basis, and Eric is absolutely the best of the best that I have known, and he's incredible. So I'm thrilled to hear what he's going to say today. I'm looking forward to this. I hope you guys get something out of this as well. Eric, I'm going to shut off my camera, mute myself so I don't interrupt, and have a great time, man.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining me, and those of you who are going to watch recorded. It's been over the last couple of years, it's been kind of exciting if you're an Active Directory or a Windows person. Microsoft has this tendency to hold on to things forever and not really want to change. There's that great video out there of a gentleman who spins up a VM or something, and he starts with like Windows DOS, and then goes to 3.1.1, et cetera, all the way up to Windows 7. So Microsoft loves backwards compatibility. They have troubles changing things at times to cope with the ever-changing needs and requirements that are out there. Doesn't mean that it is a bad product. I'm actually a big proponent of Microsoft products. It's just they like that backward compatibility. But starting in 2022 and through 2023 and this year and continuing into next year, they've been making significant changes to how some underlying components of the operating system and AD and authentication all work. And what does that mean for us, both as a offensive person, if you're out there and you're going to be doing pen testing, or as a defensive, somebody on the blue team? What does this mean? What are we actually being protected against? Well, there's this great set of posts out there where Microsoft is tracking all of these changes, and some of them we're going to cover today and some we're not. These are the three main, and then we're going to cover some other things that Microsoft has talked about, but not really being tracked as a security enhancement like these are. The one on the list that I'm not going to spend the most amount of time on is that number 2, the net logon protocol changes. This really was Microsoft and Samba in general all realized that they have a problem with how they were dealing with back and forth communications. They were using signing instead of sealing for a lot of their communications. And so signing, if you're not familiar with encryption, is we look at a packet, we hash something, we send it back and forth to validate it didn't change, while sealing is encrypting the entire set of information. And that's what happened with that number 2 there, that net logon protocol change. They went from signing to sealing. Therefore, all the RPC communication now is being encrypted from the beginning. All the authentication and everything is encrypted now, making it more secure. Also caused a whole bunch of problems with older Samba or other Windows-based type file sharing items out there, including VMware. But all of that has gone through. That finished in the mid-July. At this point, you can't even turn it off. And that's what these different phases mean. I should have covered that before. So we see that there are these phases of how things are going. Phase 1 is Microsoft has put the patch in place, and all it's doing is auditing what's going on. Phase 2 is you should be able to modify, and it's going to start blocking things. Phase 3 is we are absolutely blocking things, but you can go back to just auditing if you want. And phase 4 is you have no choice. It is, or phase 4, phase 5, depending on the rollout. You have no choice. It is being put in place. It's being enforced. You can't roll back. So NetLogon was interesting, but not as interesting as the top one, the Kerberos pack signatures. If you don't understand the Microsoft authentication process, by default, when you're in a domain, which most Windows devices are on corporate networks, you use Kerberos authentication first. Kerberos is all about tickets. I like to think about it as passports. When I enter another country, I say I'm Eric, I hold up my passport. If they believe, which it is, I shouldn't say believe it is, but they validate that my passport is correct and came from the United States, they give me entry. Certificates are kind of the same thing, or sorry, tickets are the same thing. When your device, you go to a Kerberos enabled application, behind the scenes, your Windows box is sending a Kerberos ticket back to the domain controller to get another one to send to the application to say, this is Eric, he'd like to access you. Can he actually use you as an application? Use whatever you might be allowing him to do. The thing is, Kerberos by default doesn't really have this area of understanding what permissions or groups or other items you might be in for a system to make that determination. It really is just, Kerberos is meant to validate that you are you, and the system says he can come in. Now let them do whatever you have permissions to do in that app. The pack is an extra part that is added to a Kerberos ticket. It's called the Privilege Attribute Certificate. It is a signed portion that contains pieces of information such as the groups you're a member of, your user identity, and other pieces of information that Microsoft wants to be able to present to servers for you so that another request doesn't have to go back and forth to the DC, or that application doesn't need to have a specific entry for you. It might be able to use groups or other pieces of information to say that Eric is allowed to use it because he's a member of this group, and that's what the permissions are assigned to. So what happens is this pack, the privileged attribute certificate portion of the ticket, gets abused by attackers in what are called golden tickets. Golden tickets are forged Kerberos tickets out there that can be made after an attacker has compromised your domain to the point that he gets the password hash for a very specific account in the domain. And it basically allows the attacker or the pen tester to create a ticket, say that the user is a member of whatever groups they want, and have the domain or other systems validate it and believe that that ticket is accurate and true because it came from a trusted source. Golden tickets are, from the attacker's perspective, a wonderful means of retaining access in your environment because, once again, they're considered trusted for their entire lifetime. And while Microsoft and domains have a default time frame set there, which could be anywhere from 4 hours to 10 hours, 12 hours-ish, it can be extended much longer through other means. When creating a golden ticket, an attacker can say this ticket lasts for years if they really wanted to. So what happened is Microsoft put into place a way of having extra validations be done on that pack. You say you are this person. Okay, great. Are you really this person? Does your ticket have the information to say that you really are who you declared you were in the ticket? And are these groups potentially valid? This change went in and became fully vetted, we saw back in October-ish. And really what happened is it made a whole bunch of changes. It has increased the security of your environment. They realized, though, that they didn't catch everything with this full first rollout. And just this month, actually, last week, Microsoft added more enhancements, which is going to continue on through 2025, that'll do further limitations of what somebody might be able to do with this pack portion of a ticket. So overall, this is a great enhancement. This is something that should have been there, and I'm glad to see it has been done. But what does it really mean? Well, part one of this is when that initial enforcement phase came out and phase two came out, where they turned it on, a bunch of domains began to see problems. And that was because the original way the pack was validated wasn't great. And if people had said, I want to enforce better encryption types on our tickets, so instead of using RC4, the older method, we want to enforce AES encryption on them, which has been an option since 2008, things began to break all over the place. So what that means is all of the troubleshooting steps on how to correct Kerberos authentication, as of right now, assist you in finding how to actually start using better forms of encryption for Kerberos tickets. That's another great thing. RC4 tickets can be cracked. We can get the passwords out of some of those RC4 tickets very quickly, depending on how strong the passwords are. And then if we can crack those passwords, we can then log in as those accounts. That's usually more for service accounts, things that are running like perhaps a SQL service or a web service or something else on a member server, but still an attack pathway. If you go through these troubleshooting steps that Microsoft has posted out there, you're going to start using AES, and then it becomes much harder for an attacker or a pen tester to take any tickets they manage to get and crack them for the password. So that's really, once again, strong. But then when we break this down, as far as the pack changes, what does it really change? Mainly, it's how effective a golden ticket can be. That's its main point. With all the pack changes coming in and the new ones that they're putting in place that should limit what SIDs can be accepted by domain controllers through packs when you're going from one domain to another and other aspects, it will limit an attacker's ability to use golden tickets, perhaps completely, or at least at a minimum, limit an attacker's ability to pivot from one domain in your forest, Active Directory forest, to another. And I say, in theory, these new changes, as I said, were really just rolled out last week, and I haven't had a chance to really pin down how it changes the behavior of the pack. Myself, and I'm sure a whole bunch of other people out there, are trying to figure that out and see what it really means and the behavior changes, so we can actually give a really good opinion of what this means. Regardless, it makes using golden tickets much harder in the environment. It makes catching the use of golden tickets much easier in your environment. But golden tickets themselves are a post-exploitation method of retaining access or doing a pivot and escalation. To use or create a golden ticket, once again, an attacker has had to have compromised your domain to the point that they can pull password hashes right out of the directory. If I can pull password hashes off of your domain controller for any user, which is what I need to do to create a golden ticket, I can now still log in as any user. I may not be able to create a golden ticket, but I can use a multitude of other tools out there, netexec, tools from scripts that have been written through utilities from IMPacket, Rubris. The list is really quite long that allow an attacker to submit the password hash instead of the actual password and gain access to a system. So once again, what this has really done is limit the ability to make and use a golden ticket. It does not help if an attacker can get administrative access to your domain. Once that's done, other methods are still on the table to pivot and escalate. If you still allow administrators and domain admins to log onto less secure devices where other people are administrators, you still have a significant issue. So while this is a huge change and an important change, it will not stop all of the privilege escalation options out there that are available to attackers. Other work still needs to happen. but it is a great control. So once again, stops golden ticket use. And if you follow any of the troubleshooting documentation out there because you're having Kerberos authentication issues, you'll probably end up using a more secure encryption method on your tickets, making it harder for attackers to do certain tasks to get passwords for service accounts. All in all, really, once again, strong, but not a complete change. We still have to be vigilant of where we're using our identities and different accounts on different systems in a domain. So the next big change, certificates. For quite a while, 2008-ish, 2008 R2-ish, so if Eric can do math on a webcast, 16 years ago-ish, certificates have been a valid way of logging into a domain. You don't need a password if you don't want. You could use a certificate on its own. In 2021, really smart people from SpectreOps disclosed this attack methodology at DEF CON. And really what it comes down to is there are ways that you can abuse certificate request processes to become somebody else. The worst version of this is that you as an organization have a template out there that allows users to supply whatever name they want when they request their certificate. And at that point, even though I'm Eric and I'm saying I'd like a new certificate, all I do when I make the request is I say, I'm actually that domain admin over there. And your certificate server gives me a certificate that says, you're a domain admin. And I'm now a domain admin. Microsoft has released a whole bunch of updates that will not be fully enforced until 2025 that limit the ability to abuse attributes in Active Directory to abuse those attributes to get a certificate belonging to somebody else. There are two main methods when you request a certificate from a Windows CA. The first is look at what information I have in Active Directory and build me a certificate off of that. And the second is user gets to supply whatever information they want, and that's the certificate they get. Well, the second will not be protected by the changes that's going on. If you have a bad template out there that people can supply whatever information they want, they will still be able to do so and get a certificate for it. The attacker needs to supply more information in their request so that it actually validates to a user, but that's just saying this is my subject name, which is a specific name for that object in AD, as well as this is my security identifier, which I can pull out of AD. Both of those things anyone can get if they read access to your domain. So if you allow that to happen, you still allow users to supply their own subjects when they request a certificate, you're still at risk. However, what they won't be able to do is modify certain things such as DNS host name and a couple of other attributes that the certificates are typically built off of if you use AD as a location to get that information. That is the hole that Microsoft is plugging. So once again, they are making it harder for attackers to abuse this, but not in every case. There's still things to look for. There's still things to check for your certificate templates. It's just you can have more confidence in that if you're using the attribute-based method of creating certificates, that it will be effective and people will not be able to abuse it to get certificates that don't really belong to them. In both cases, I should have mentioned, and I'll cover this later actually, Microsoft has introduced more alerting and event log generation for these behaviors. What that does mean for a blue teamer is that really you shouldn't just be looking in the security event log right now. You should also be looking in the system event log for a whole bunch of, for any event that really comes from the source of Kerberos key distribution center and net logon. If you look for errors and warnings for those two sources, you'll be able to start seeing strange behaviors when the domain controller says, I can't allow that certificate to log in because it doesn't have the right information, or I can't use that Kerberos ticket that somebody has tried to generate because it doesn't have the right information. Both of those are very important to add to your auditing and alerting, because once again, not every attacker is going to submit all of the information that they need at every point in time. They might just use the defaults, which are the common things that are out there. When you look at how do I use this utility, it says here the minimum set of information you need to supply. If they use that, it will definitely generate an alert and something that should be investigated very quickly. So certificates, yet again, another attack pathway that is being shut down by Microsoft, but only if you're using the method where certificates are built out of information from AD. Having users supply their information, it will not be caught. However, if you are a subscriber to Defender for Identity, that should still catch those odd requests where a certificate has been requested for somebody other than the real user. Another great, if you're not using Defender for Identity or you're not using any of the Defender products, it might be something to look at, but it is not an inexpensive option for you. So that was the 3 main changes that Microsoft has been tracking as significant security changes that break the behavior, the default behavior of AD, and so they've had an extended rollout. The next one I think is great. And it's not considered a security patch. It's just an enhancement, a feature they're putting in. For some reason, many organizations, while they have a great control over their on-prem Active Directory environment, when we move to the cloud, we suddenly forget a whole bunch of the lessons that we learned over the last 20 years using AD, such as you need to have more than one account. And on top of that, a lot of administrators or organizations relax things like MFA requirements if someone is coming from a trusted source, like an internal network or something like that. We're not going to require an MFA check. And you can just log in with a password, or we're just going to do pass-through authentication altogether so that people don't have to continue to enter passwords. That's a wonderful benefit for users doing normal user activity, but as soon as we say you're an administrator doing something in Azure, that's a problem. You should have a separate account, or you should have at minimum MFA so that it's not just pass through. You need to use some other source to validate who you are. If you don't want to have a separate account, once again, MFA or PIM options, privileged access management, where you get the ability to be an administrator temporarily, all of those are valid. But really what I see multiple times is that me as an administrator, Eric Kuehn at company.com, I log into Azure with my Eric Kuehn at company.com. And even though I'm a regular user on-prem, I'm a global administrator in Azure with that account. Microsoft realized that this is a problem. And what they have done is they are actively creating Microsoft managed conditional access policies in Azure that right now are not enforced, but start auditing and logging and tracking and saying, hey, this administrator logged in without MFA. You really should change this. Originally, Microsoft was just going to say, we're going to turn it on. There was some pushback, so they've moved it to auditing. And as of right now, they don't have plans on saying we're going to enforce this for all the administrative accounts. An administrative account in Azure is one of about 13 roles, things like global administrator, security administrator, and a few others. But originally, they were going to say we're going to enforce this. They've backpedaled a little bit and are just auditing right now. And then they have said, we are going to allow organizations to turn this on or off at their own desire. And all of the recommendations do state that you should exclude a break glass account from this policy, these conditional access policies. If you don't have a break glass account in your environment, it might be something you want to consider. A break glass account should be just a user account in Azure that is a global admin, that is excluded from your conditional access policies, but has a password so long that it will never be guessed. Like, let's say 40 characters or longer, and you hold that password somewhere And it's in case you need to have access because your conditional access policies have gone awry somehow. It's your last chance method to gain access back to your environment. But Microsoft just says you should exclude those. You have the choice of if you want to turn it on or keep it for alerting. But they have noted that it is a problem, and they are trying to help people start enforcing MFA on all privileged accounts in Azure. They also went through, and for tenants that appeared not to be using conditional access policies at all, originally said that they were just going to turn on something called security defaults. And this would require certain aspects to happen for people to log in. That caused problems, unfortunately, where maybe somebody didn't say we have conditional access policies, but they changed Azure to use a third-party source for MFA, like Okta or something else. And it started breaking that system. So Microsoft has now paused as of February, and are looking at how they might implement that and catch those other third-party MFA sources. So either way, Microsoft yet again is stepping in place and saying, this is a severe problem. Our documentation that says you need to have MFA in place for all of your privileged access is not always being followed. We want to assist you in getting there. So this is a very important change. If you allow administrative access into Azure without an MFA check, I would urge you to investigate your policies and make a change so that it is required. Let's see. Is this why I missed your questions? I'm sorry. Is this why Microsoft made Kerberos compatible with Azure Active Directory? So as far as the Kerberos changes before, they were doing that before these security changes. So they want to be able to leverage, they've always wanted to allow you to do the pass-through authentication, single sign-on into Azure. And then they have for a long time offered the ability to do the reverse way if you turn other aspects on. Basically, you have a proxying device that can do the Kerberos authentication for people who aren't in your on-prem environment. So it allowed to come back. The SAN name for hack of domain admin. Yep. Thank you. And then on Microsoft accounts for users that have privileged roles. So that is absolutely, yeah, that is a good one of doing it. Just stick with the on Microsoft. You could also register another DNS name that is not your primary one if you want to leverage that. Anything else, it really is, that is a great point there, Paul, though, of that break glass account should not really be part of your standard email login domain. It should be something separate outside of what everybody is using on a day-to-day basis. Great points. Thank you. So the next big change that has come through but hasn't really been part of the entire enhanced rollout or security patch rollout has been the changes to SMB. Microsoft announced that they are going to require SMB signing at all points in time from Windows 11 clients. They were supposed to actually have that be included earlier this year. I still don't see it on all the clients. I'm hoping that it's going to be there. But what it will do is it will require that when a Windows device, Windows 11 in this case, reaches out to a system for a file share, that all of the communications going back and forth are actually between the client and that system that they're trying to connect to. It prevents a set of attacks called SMB relay attacks, which once were my favorite form of doing a pivot. An SMB relay attack is an attacker sets up this device on your network. They find a server that is not requiring SMB signing. They point their communications to that, and they say, when anybody connects to you with NTLM, you're going to reach out, and you're going to initiate communications with that remote system. If the person who connected to you is an administrator on that box, we get to run a command. SMB signing, once again, removes that ability to do the man in the middle of attack, where our bad host can't forward the information. because the client and the server need to agree that they're all the same. So this was the announcement that SMB signing is going to be required by default. And it might, once it actually hits Windows 11 entirely, it might be backported to Server 2022, but probably isn't, and it will be part of Server 2025. Right now, it is in the preview version for these things. So we'll see what happens if it actually makes it into the OS build. So that is SMB signing required by default. Some people think about the changes that were announced when SMB 3 came out with Server 2012. SMB 3 was the newest version of how Windows does file sharing, server message block, and it allows something called SMB encryption. SMB signing, like any signing technology is, we validate that things have not changed and you are who has sent this message. It looks good. SMB encryption is just that next step. Not only do we agree that it came from you, but the traffic is actually encrypted. It gives confidentiality on top of the integrity check that signing does. The thing is that encryption, SMB encryption, has a higher overhead than SMB signing. If you turned on SMB signing years ago, when Microsoft originally said you should turn it on everywhere, you'd see like a 40% network hit. It takes 40% longer for you to do copy jobs. It is not nearly that bad now. SMB signing is really a minimal impact to these copy jobs. And SMB encryption is not that big of a hit at all, but it does have some overhead, especially on processor and some network traffic. The thing is, encryption is not turned on by default. It is capable with SMB3, but it's not turned on. LDAP binds going through VIP will still be seen as a man in the middle. Yes. So LDAP binds are really outside of this protection here. That is something else, which we'll cover in a minute, potentially something else. But overall, LDAP binds themselves, if they're true straight LDAP binds, will be probably seen as a man in the middle of the attack. And they are outside of all of these things we're talking about it. Okay, SMB behind VIPs. Yeah, so if you've had to do something strange where you have allowed SMB to go between them and you are using like a CNAME record or an alias record, that is absolutely going to start breaking everywhere and will not be, it won't work in any case in the near future. If I caught your question as to what you're talking there. Okay, cool. So SMB encryption is not turned on by default. It takes extra steps to do it. And the thing is, if you do it, it only really works for SMB3. It doesn't work for any of the other ones, SMB2, SMB1. If you still have it, please don't have SMB1. You shouldn't there. But SMB2 isn't protected by this. The changes that Microsoft has made to SMB, along with the, hey, we're forcing it to be signing. The signing requirement, you need to check in with the KDC daily. I'm not sure on that question exactly what you mean. So the SMB signing is between the client and the server you're trying to connect to over SMB, making sure that they are who they say they are. So yes, it typically is going to be over a Kerberos method. And so you would need to have valid tickets in the devices to be able to talk to each other. Yes. It should, though, drop to NTLM if required, behind the scenes, if necessary. But anytime you're using Kerberos, it's all point to point, unless you've done some other things to allow Kerberos delegation, which I'd be happy to talk to you at some other point, but is not quite in the scope for today. Same with the Zscaler. Same thing is going to happen. Yep, no worries. So what Microsoft has done, though, is in, once again, the preview versions, Microsoft has made more changes that would say, we are going to allow make it easier to use SMB encryption. We're going to say the entire server, not individual shares. Great. And we're going to say, if we choose to turn this on, it will only be for these shares, or it must be enforced and no one can downgrade. A whole bunch of different security enhancements to how clients and servers will use SMB encryption. Along with that, they've made some changes for other aspects too, right? We need certs, we need other aspects, whatever it might be. So it is going to be easier to use the encryption and easier to enforce the use of SMB encryption. But also, more importantly, SMB signing, in theory, will be turned on everywhere. And being turned on everywhere, unfortunately, means it's the default setting. It still can be overwritten by setting specific keys or turning things on via GPOs, enforcing certain settings via GPOs. So it would be the default, but could still be overwritten. On top of this, beyond just normal SMB, in preview right now, Microsoft has some options out there to allow clients to connect to file shares that aren't on port 445. For the longest time, SMB had to be 445. Only way that Windows clients could do it. They've made changes now where a client could actually from port, thus allowing the whole networking model of you're not restricted to specific ports to do activities. Would be great. Downside is Windows servers at this point are still forced to use 445 for normal TCP Windows file sharing. But Microsoft has this other thing called QIC, which is a standard for how traffic can occur between applications over SSL TLS 443. It's a UDP method of doing communications. It does require certificates. All the traffic is encrypted, but that could be on any port. And that's something you could turn on a Windows file server if you wanted to start doing file shares over something else. It is still preview. Hopefully it's going to hit everybody, and that will be another option. From an attacker perspective, what that means right now is I can't trust that 445 is the only thing that has file shares. Most likely it's still going to be that, because I don't know many people who have gone through to enable QIC for file sharing on their Windows servers, but it might happen. Something new to look at out there. Here's the biggest one. The biggest announcement that was made towards the end of last year, fourth quarter of last year. Microsoft has said, yet again, I admit it, they said it again before, we're going to get rid of NTLM. Thus, is this for real? Microsoft has had the ability for people to turn off NTLM in their environment forever. Probably, I think, since 2003, trying to remember. 2003, 2008, somewhere in there. It's been an option for you to just turn it off. The downside is most developers and many admins don't know what that means and what happens if you turn off NTLM. Probably it's going to start breaking things everywhere because the applications have not been made Kerberos enabled, and your authentication is just dropping back down to NTLM behind the scenes. So Microsoft has had this option forever. No one has really gone through with it. I shouldn't say no one. There are a couple of orgs that I know of that have done it with great pains to get there, but they did. Only can use Kerberos. What happened is Microsoft is now going to be giving you methods that you can use to allow Kerberos authentication without downgrading to NTLM. They have not been brought into any preview, and we don't have a heck of a lot of details on them, other than Microsoft says they want to do it in the near future. But the two things that they have are IA Kerb, which is basically a Kerberos proxy method, so that if you have clients that don't have direct line of sight to a domain controller, you can have them proxy through this and get line of sight to a domain controller so that it is possible to use Kerberos again. And then the idea of replacing the default communications between non-domain joined hosts from using NTLM and other methods like that, replace how the SAM functions and interacts with authentication, and put a local KDC on a box. I am curious as to what this is going to look like. because once again, when you start using Kerberos, it's all supposed to be contained within a realm, and it's supposed to be point-to-point communication. So I don't know how this would work. I am very curious to see what they're going to do and how that's going to change aspects. But what it does mean is that it would start limiting a whole bunch of other relay attacks out there that require NTLM. The SMB relays require NTLM. So even if you don't have SMB signing, if you get rid of NTLM, we're stuck. There are other ones as well. There's a whole bunch of attacks that are out there. There's the petit patam method where you can submit a request to a domain controller. It will send you its NTLM hash. Really, you send it to any Windows device. It will send you its hash. You could use that hash to do things, etc. All of that would go away. There's also changes in preview as shown there that will allow you to say workstations. Even though we have NTLM out there, we're going to just start blocking you from being able to use NTLM except for these specific hosts. That's the big problem right now. If you turn off NTLM in your environment, it's everything. It's an all or nothing thing. This will let you go through. It will let you say, we want to block NTLM, but we know that these hosts require it still for whatever reason, and so you can use NTLM to them. That would be a great addition and help start moving people away from this very old legacy protocol that has multiple problems with it. Start allowing more and more Kerberos authentication to occur in your environment, which is really where we want to get to. So this was a big announcement. I am hopeful. As a Windows person, I am really hopeful that this goes forward and it comes out quickly. But the details are very slim since it was just announced October 2023. Hopefully we see something new in preview in the next few months here. So based upon all of that, in summary, what does this mean over the last year and things that are coming up? What's going on? The ability to use Kerberos tickets and make forged tickets, either golden tickets, which is I assume somebody's identity. I say I'm them, even though I'm not, for all aspects, or forging silver tickets, which is I say I'm this person when I want to try and access this one application. All of that is getting harder to do. How hard? Undetermined. I wish I didn't know that Microsoft was going to release a security update the week before my webcast. Bad on me, not seeing the future. But I hope to have an update in the near future on what that actually means due to this most recent security patch that came out last week in April 2024. But it also means that attackers should stop seeing RC4 encrypted Kerberos certificates out there in the environment. We should start seeing more and more AES encrypted certificates. That will make it harder for us to crack. It doesn't make it harder for us to abuse them if we can get a hold of them. If I can get a hold of a user's ticket that declares they are this person, the encryption doesn't make a difference. I can still use it however I want and become that person. But it does mean that when I go through and make certain attacks to request tickets for service accounts, an attack called Kerberosing, those should start coming back more often as AES encrypted and harder for us to crack offline and get the passwords for those service accounts. This also means, as an attacker, if you are out there and you are forging tickets, you should really start using the AES encryption over RC4 to try and stay hidden longer. It also means that really we should start looking at old attacks again. We're always going through this, what system is better, defensive, blue team, red team, who knows who's winning. But this does mean that some of the older attacks might become more viable. Let me inject a command into a process that's running as this privileged user. My favorite one for that is always the little tray icon for the antivirus software that that person is using. That still works. Once again, all of these enhancements will not help you at all if you don't have good account tiering, credential compartmentalization, my favorite term, device tiering. If you allow different identities of different sensitivity be on the same device, you're opening yourself to a significant amount of risk. So old attacks become good again. Maybe some of these Kerberos attacks don't work quite as well. we as attackers need to start looking for more ports for Windows shares. We as defenders need to start looking for more ports that Windows shares might be on. Still happens to this day. A new Windows share is created and it's permissioned so that everyone has the ability to read that share, or authenticated users has everybody has the ability to read information in that share. We now maybe need to start looking at these other places and not just 445 standard Windows shares. We need to think about QIC as a possibility in the near future. Because SMB signing is going to be the default setting, SMB relays are dying fast. It may not help you for quite a while if you have that service account on a Windows server come out and make connections to devices, something perhaps your Nessus scanning or your vulnerability scanning identity, or the identity that's doing NAC checks on your systems. If that is an overly permissioned account, we might still be able to relay it depending on where it goes and what's happening. Beyond that, NTLM relays themselves are not far behind, maybe the next 2 years. Who knows where we are with that? But NTLM relays themselves, in theory, should be going away soon. Certificate services as a method of doing privilege escalation are harder to do, easier to be detected, but still not perfect, right? Once again, depending on what your templates look like, it still might be very easy to abuse certificate services to gain administrative access to systems or your domain. As a blue teamer, we need to be looking in the system event log on our domain controllers for security problems, not just the ones you might be looking for, like a new service was created or a service started, stopped, etc., but literal messages from the domain controller stating, I could not do a default thing with Kerberos because this ticket is strange or this certificate is strange. So we need to start adding those identifiers. I listed the sources there because the actual event IDs themselves are shared between multiple sources. So you want to be looking for warnings and errors for those 3 sources in the Windows system event log. And then finally, if you're not using MFA for privileged access into Azure, I don't know why you aren't. Please start doing so. Take a look at your Azure environment. You'll see that Microsoft Managed policy there. Look at it. See how often it's been tracking people as logging in without MFA and what's going on. Something very important for us to do. Let me see. For overall ease of Kerberos, DMSAs, yep, SPN self-registration, self-write, yes. That is correct. But going to Kerberos requires that the team start registering. So if it is not a GMSA, that is correct, Paul. They would have to register those SPNs. Absolutely 100% correct. That has to be done by someone for that application to get its identity so that those Kerberos tickets can be handed out. The service tickets can be created. Hopefully I answered your question there. If not, let me know. And then I'll be more than happy to post the slide somewhere. If you want to do your own reading to get into more detail into everything I talked about, here are all the links of different places that you can go and what you can do to get more information. Yep, perfect, Paul. Okay, just want to be sure. Yes, you are absolutely correct. SPNs are service principal names, which are application identities in your directory. And that's it. That's all I have. Any other questions? Anything else? I covered a whole bunch today of things that Microsoft has been doing over the last year and a half. I don't know if I have wait a 15-second delay, but I'll do it anyways. Oh, you're muted, Kevin. You're muted.
Man, I forgot I was muted. I was saying, thank you very much. That was excellent. I appreciate it. I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.
And, we can see you all next time.
Absolutely.